rain slashed against the windshield when a blacked-out Maybach careened off the bridge, plunging into the freezing waters below. A 22-year-old girl with nothing left to lose dove in. She pulled out a lifeless 200-pound billionaire. But when his fangs grazed her bleeding wrist, her nightmare truly began. Midnight on December 14th was unforgiving in Seattle. Harper Quinn sat shivering in the driver's seat of her rusted 1998 Honda Civic, wrapped in 3 layers of thrift store blankets. Parked illegally near the dense wooded perimeter of Seward Park, she was just trying to survive another night. Her mother's staggering oncology bills from Virginia Mason Medical Center had devoured their savings, their home, and ultimately her mother's life. Now Harper had exactly $14 to her name, a dying car battery, and a crippling sense of isolation. Headlights ripped through the pitch-black night, violently bright and erratic. Harper bolted upright just as the agonizing screech of tires tearing across wet asphalt echoed through the trees. A massive, heavily armored Mercedes Maybach S600 Guard came tearing down Lake Washington Boulevard at over 100 miles an hour. Sparks flew in a terrifying shower as the luxury tank sideswiped the concrete barriers. It wasn't an accident. The Maybach was being hunted. 2 unmarked matte black SUVs were riding its bumper, their headlights completely extinguished. A sharp, explosive crack, the undeniable sound of high-caliber gunfire, shattered the quiet. The Maybach's front left tire blew out, the massive vehicle fishtailed, violently snapping through the reinforced steel guardrails as if they were made of toothpicks. Gravity claimed it instantly. The car plummeted over the embankment, hitting the freezing, churning waters of Lake Washington with a deafening impact that sent a massive plume of white water into the air. The pursuit SUVs skidded to a halt up on the road. Doors slammed, flashlights cut through the rain. Harper didn't think. Instinct, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of adrenaline and raw desperation, took over. She kicked her car door open, scrambling down the muddy, rain-slicked embankment, hiding behind a thick cluster of evergreen trees. Up on the road, men in tactical gear were pointing assault rifles at the sinking car. "Let it sink," a voice barked over the storm, a deep, gravelly voice belonging to a man later identified in leaked underground dossiers as Arthur Pendleton, a ruthless mercenary commander. Nothing survives that water. Not even him. They didn't shoot. They just watched the water swallow the million-dollar vehicle. Once the taillights disappeared beneath the murky surface, the men piled back into their SUVs and sped off into the night. Silence descended, broken only by the relentless downpour. Harper threw off her heavy coats. The water temperature was hovering around 38 degrees, cold enough to trigger hypothermia in minutes, cold enough to stop a human heart. But she couldn't just walk away. Someone was dying down there. She dove into the black water. The cold hit her like a physical blow, driving the oxygen from her lungs in a violent gasp. It felt as though thousands of icy needles were driving themselves into her skin. Kicking her legs, Harper forced her eyes open in the murky, stinging darkness. The Maybach was sinking nose first, its heavy armored plating pulling it down into the lakebed's thick silt. Harper swam furiously, her hands blindly scraping against the metallic hull until she found the driver's side window. The reinforced glass was severely spiderwebbed from the gunfire, and the immense water pressure was bowing it inward. Inside, illuminated by the fading, eerie glow of the dashboard, electronics was a man. He was massive. Even slumped over the steering wheel unconscious, his sheer size was intimidating. He wore a bespoke, charcoal-grey Italian suit, now ruined by the rising water. Harper pounded her fists against the glass. It didn't budge. Her lungs were burning, screaming for air. She kicked off the door, swimming up to the surface to take a desperate, ragged breath before plunging back into the abyss. This time she grabbed a jagged, heavy piece of metal debris that had sheared off the guardrail and sunk nearby. Swimming back to the window, she swung the metal bar with everything she had. Crack! The structural integrity of the bullet-riddled glass finally gave way. The window imploded, sending a violently swirling vortex of freezing water rushing into the cabin along with millions of tiny razor-sharp shards of glass. Harper reached in her bare forearm, scraping painfully against the jagged edges of the window frame. A deep gash tore open her flesh, sending a warm ribbon of crimson blood swirling into the cold water, but the adrenaline masked the pain. She grabbed the man by his broad shoulders. He felt like a statue carved from solid granite. He easily weighed over 200 pounds, his dense musculature making him impossibly heavy, a dead weight trapped by the seatbelt. Harper fumbled blindly over his chest, her freezing, numb fingers desperately searching for the buckle. She found the release, pressing it down hard. With a frantic, agonizing pull, she hauled him out through the shattered window. The swim to the surface was pure torture. Her vision was tunneling, graying at the edges. Her muscles seized, burning with lactic acid and extreme cold. She hooked her bleeding arm under his heavy jaw, kicking her legs in a sloppy, desperate rhythm. The man was unnaturally still. They broke the surface. Harper gasped violently, choking on lake water and rain. "Help!" she screamed, though she knew no one was coming. "Somebody help me!" With agonizing slowness, inch by muddy inch, Harper dragged the giant of a man onto the rocky shore. She collapsed beside him, her chest heaving, coughing up water, her entire body shaking so violently her teeth rattled. For a moment, all she could do was lay there in the mud, bleeding and freezing. But the silence from the man beside her forced her to move. She crawled over to his motionless body. Up close, his features were striking sharp, aristocratic cheekbones, an uncompromising jawline, and thick, dark hair plastered against his forehead. But he was pale. Too pale. His skin was the color of alabaster, entirely drained of blood. Harper pressed 2 trembling fingers to his carotid artery. Nothing. There was no pulse, no breath escaping his slightly parted lips. He was completely, unequivocally dead. Harper knelt in the freezing mud, the rain washing the blood from her deeply lacerated arm. Panic clawed at her throat. She had risked her life, plunged into freezing water, only to drag a corpse ashore. No, come on," she muttered, her voice trembling. She positioned her hands over the center of his massive, broad chest and pushed down beginning chest compressions. It was like trying to compress solid rock. His ribcage didn't yield an inch. The man's physical density was entirely inhuman. Harper leaned her entire body weight into it, grunting with exertion, but it was useless. "Breathe, damn it!" she yelled over the storm, pinching his nose and leaning down to force air into his lungs. As she leaned over his face, her injured arm hovered directly above his mouth. A single heavy drop of her blood, bright crimson and thick, fell from her torn flesh. It landed perfectly on the man's pale lips. What happened next defied every law of nature, science, and reality. The drop of blood absorbed into his skin as if the man's body was a parched desert, drinking the rain. A sharp, violent tremor racked his massive frame. His eyes snapped open. Harper scrambled backward, a scream caught in her throat. His eyes weren't human. The irises were a terrifying, mesmerizing shade of glowing crimson, burning like dying embers in the pitch-black night. Before Harper could even get to her feet, the man moved with a speed that the human eye could barely track. In a fraction of a second, he was sitting up. His massive hand shot out, wrapping around her wounded forearm with a grip that felt like industrial steel. He didn't pull her down to attack her. Instead, his glowing eyes fixated entirely on the deep, bleeding gash on her arm. "Donovan!" A deep, guttural voice hissed from his lips, a sound that vibrated right through Harper's chest. It wasn't a threat. It was an introduction. "Donovan Hayes." a name whispered with reverence and terror in the shadowy elite circles of the Pacific Northwest, though Harper had no idea who he was. He pulled her arm toward his face. Harper thrashed, kicking her legs, terrified he was going to rip her arm off. "Let me go. Please." Donovan didn't listen. He opened his mouth, and Harper watched in absolute paralyzing horror as two perfectly sharp, elongated fangs descended from his upper gums. He didn't tear into her flesh. Instead, he pressed his cold, hard lips directly over the open wound on her forearm, his tongue sweeping over the laceration. The moment his mouth touched her blood, Harper felt a sudden, shocking rush of euphoria crash through her nervous system. The freezing cold vanished. The pain in her arm evaporated, replaced by a blinding, intoxicating warmth that made her head spin. Her resistance melted away, her muscles turning completely slack as he fed on the blood already spilling from her injury. He only took a few mouthfuls. As suddenly as he had grabbed her, Donovan pulled back, releasing her arm. Harper collapsed back into the mud, gasping for air, her mind reeling. She stared at her arm. The deep, jagged wound from the shattered glass was gone. The flesh was completely smooth, unblemished, leaving only smeared blood on her skin to prove it had ever been there. She looked up at Donovan in terror. The man was transforming right in front of her. The pale, deathly grey of his skin was flooding with rich, vibrant colour. The sound of a heartbeat, deep, slow, and powerful like a heavy bass drum, suddenly filled the air between them. The water logged in his lungs evaporated into a heavy steam that rolled off his shoulders into the cold night air. He stood up. He towered over her easily, 6'4", an apex predator, wearing a ruined suit. He wiped a streak of her blood from his chin, his glowing crimson eyes fading back to a deep, striking amber. "Who sent you?" Donovan's voice was no longer a gravelly hiss. It was smooth, commanding, and laced with quiet danger. Nobody," Harper stammered, scrambling backward like a cornered animal. "I live in my car. I saw you crash. I pulled you out." Donovan narrowed his eyes, studying her face, listening to the terrified, erratic fluttering of her heart. He took a step toward her. "You broke through guarded steel glass underwater. You pulled me ashore." "Yes," she cried, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "You were dead. You didn't have a pulse. What are you?" Before Donovan could answer, the sharp hum of high-performance engines echoed from the road above. The assassins had returned. 3 blacked-out SUVs skidded to a halt near the broken guardrail. The doors flew open, and a dozen heavily armed men poured out. Tactical flashlights equipped with blinding lasers swept down the embankment, cutting through the trees like searchlights. "Check the shoreline," Pendleton's voice roared. "If he floated up, burn the body." Donovan's gaze snapped toward the road. His jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck cording like thick ropes. He looked back down at Harper, who was frozen in sheer panic, staring at the approaching beams of light. "They will kill you just for seeing me," Donovan stated coldly, his tone entirely devoid of panic. "I didn't do anything," Harper whimpered. "In my world, innocence is a liability," Donovan replied. In a blur of motion, he leaned down and scooped Harper off the ground as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. He threw her over his broad shoulder. "Wait, put me down!" Harper screamed, pounding her fists against his hard back. "Hold your breath," was all he said. A volley of silenced gunfire ripped through the trees where they had just been sitting, shredding the bark and kicking up geysers of mud. But Donovan was already gone. Harper felt the world turn into a terrifying, wind-whipped blur. The sheer velocity at which Donovan moved was physically agonizing. The G-force pressed Harper against him, the surrounding forest turning into a smeared tunnel of darkness and rain. They were moving at a speed no vehicle could match in the dense terrain leaping over massive fallen logs and scaling steep, muddy ravines with impossible ease. He didn't stop running until the sounds of the sirens and the shouting men were miles behind them, deep in the heavily forested foothills of the Cascade Mountains. He set her down roughly inside the cavernous dry hollow of a massive ancient cedar tree. Harper collapsed onto the dry pine needles, clutching her chest, hyperventilating. Her mind was fracturing. Vampires weren't real. They were Hollywood myths, campfire stories. But the man standing before her, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the pitch black of the hollow, was breathing proof of the impossible. You're a monster, she breathed out, her voice cracking. Donovan crouched down in front of her, his massive frame blocking the entrance of the hollow. He reached out his large, cold fingers, gently tipping her chin up so she was forced to look into his eyes. "I am the king of a world you didn't know existed 20 minutes ago," Donovan said softly, the lethal promise in his voice sending a shiver down her spine. "And right now, little savior, my blood is running through your veins, which means they aren't just hunting me anymore. They are hunting you." Sunrise offered no warmth in Seattle, only a grey, suffocating mist that clung to the towering evergreens of the Cascade foothills. Harper sat wrapped in an oversized cashmere blanket on a modern leather sofa, clutching a mug of black coffee. They were no longer in the muddy wilderness. Sometime before dawn, Donovan had carried her to a covert subterranean bunker, hidden beneath a decommissioned Boeing testing hangar near King County International Airport. The space was a jarring contrast to her rusted Honda Civic. It was a sprawling, high-tech fortress filled with server racks, an armory of heavy weaponry, and priceless Renaissance art, casually leaning against reinforced concrete walls. Donovan stood across the room, his back to her. He had shed his ruined suit for tactical fatigue pants and a fitted black thermal shirt that stretched across his broad, heavily muscled shoulders. He was speaking into an encrypted satellite phone, his tone low and lethal. "Pendleton missed," Donovan growled into the receiver. "I want Aegis Defense Solutions dismantled by midnight. Buy their shell companies, liquidate their assets, and find out which of the High Council paid them to orchestrate the hit. Yes, burn it all down, Callahan." He ended the call and finally turned to look at her. His amber eyes were no longer glowing, but they held a heavy, ancient weight that made Harper's breath catch in her throat. He moved toward her with a predatory, silent grace, taking a seat on the glass coffee table directly in front of her knees. "You are remarkably calm for a woman who just found out vampires control the global private military sector," Donovan said, his gaze dropping to her forearm. The skin was still perfectly smooth, devoid of any scar from the shattered glass. "I watched my mother die of aggressive lymphoma for 3 years, Mr. Hayes," Harper replied, her voice trembling but defiant. "I watched the American healthcare system drain every penny we had at Virginia Mason, leaving us homeless. Monsters in suits I'm used to. Fangs are just a new accessory." A faint, dangerous smirk touched the corner of Donovan's mouth. "Donovan. Call me Donovan." He reached out his cool, large hand, gently wrapping around her wrist. The touch sent a violent electric jolt up her arm. "Your mother's debt is erased. As of 10 minutes ago, your hospital bills are paid in full. The bank that foreclosed on your childhood home in Ballard, I just bought it. The house is yours again." Harper stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Why, because I pulled you out of a lake?" "Because you did the impossible," Donovan said, his voice dropping to a mesmerizing whisper. "I was trapped in a reinforced tomb, shot with depleted uranium rounds, designed to paralyze my kind, drowning in freezing water. I was in a regenerative stasis, a death sleep. Human blood, normal human blood, cannot wake a vampire king from a death sleep. But yours did." He leaned in closer, his thumb tracing the invisible line where her wound used to be. When my lips touched your blood, it was like swallowing liquid fire. It didn't just heal you, Harper. It rebound my severed neural pathways in seconds. Do you know your blood type? O negative, Harper whispered, shrinking back slightly into the leather cushions. No. Donovan corrected, his eyes darkening with a possessive intensity. You were misdiagnosed. You have Rutschnull, the golden blood. Fewer than 50 people on the entire planet have it. To humans, it makes you a universal donor for rare blood types. To my kind, it makes you a myth, a battery of infinite biological power. And now that I have tasted it, now that my venom has entered your bloodstream, to heal your arm, you are marked. Harper's stomach dropped. Marked. The blood bond. Donovan explained, his gaze locked intensely on hers. Pendleton and his mercenaries didn't just track my vehicle tonight. They track biological signatures. When I healed you, our biology intertwined. You are broadcasting my signature, and I am broadcasting yours. They will never stop hunting you, Harper. The rival factions of the High Council will slaughter armies to get their hands on a golden blood vessel. Before Harper could process the sheer magnitude of the nightmare, she had stumbled into a deafening, metallic screech, echoed through the cavernous hangar above them. The security alarms didn't blare. They were instantly overridden, the bunker plunging into complete darkness before the emergency red strobe lights violently flared to life. They bypassed the biometric firewall. Donovan snarled, his fangs elongating with a sickening crack of shifting bone. He stood up, his massive frame instantly shielding her. Pendleton didn't come alone. He brought the Strigoi. The what? Harper yelled over the sudden, terrifying sound of heavy explosives detonating at the bunker's main blast doors. Vampire mercenaries. Donovan said, pulling a massive matte-black Desert Eagle from a hidden holster under the table, casually racking the slide. He looked back at her, his amber eyes burning with that terrifying demonic crimson light. Stay behind me. If anyone touches you, I will tear their spine out through their throat. The reinforced titanium blast doors didn't just open. They were violently blown off their massive hinges, a 2-ton slab of metal flying across the room and smashing into the server racks. A thick cloud of pulverized concrete and white phosphorus smoke flooded the bunker. Through the stinging smoke they emerged. A dozen heavily armored mercenaries, led by Arthur Pendleton, flanked by 4 figures that didn't move like humans. These 4 moved with the same terrifying blurred velocity as Donovan. They wore tactical gear, but their faces were pale, their eyes pitch black, and their mouths dripped with raw malice. Well, well, Pendleton's voice echoed through the smoke, heavily distorted by a tactical gas mask. The king and his new pet. Kill Hayes. Bag the girl. The council wants her alive. Donovan didn't wait. He launched himself forward with an explosive force that shattered the glass coffee table beneath his boots. Harper pressed herself against the concrete wall, her hands clamped over her ears, as the deafening roar of automatic gunfire filled the bunker. The human mercenaries unloaded their assault rifles, the muzzle flashes strobing like deadly lightning. But Donovan was a phantom. He moved entirely too fast for human eyes to track. He didn't bother shooting the humans. He waded directly into their formation. With a sickening crunch, Donovan drove his fist through the tactical vest of the closest mercenary, crushing his chest cavity. He grabbed another by the helmet, violently twisting, until a sharp snap echoed over the gunfire, tossing the lifeless body aside like a broken toy. But the Strigoi were waiting. 2 of the vampire assassins hit Donovan simultaneously from the flanks, tackling the king into a concrete pillar. The sheer force of their impact cracked the reinforced stone. They gnashed and clawed their fangs, tearing at Donovan's thermal shirt, trying to rip into his jugular. Donovan roared a sound that shook the very foundation of the bunker. He grabbed the first Strigoi by the throat, lifting him completely off the floor, and drove his heavy pistol directly beneath the assassin's jaw. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot deafened the room, and the assassin's head snapped back, his body collapsing into ash and ruined tissue. While Donovan fought the remaining three, Pendleton saw his opening. The mercenary commander dropped his empty rifle, drawing a serrated combat knife, and sprinted through the smoke directly toward Harper. Harper scrambled away, throwing the heavy cashmere blanket toward him, but Pendleton easily battered it aside. He grabbed her by the hair, violently yanking her backward. Harper screamed as cold steel pressed against her carotid artery. "Hold it!" Pendleton roared over the chaos. Donovan froze. He had one Strigoi pinned to the floor, his fist raised to deliver a fatal blow. He looked up, his crimson eyes locking onto Harper. Seeing the blade pressed against her throat, the rage rolling off Donovan's body was so intense it felt like physical heat. "Let her go, Arthur," Donovan commanded. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a terrifyingly calm, vibrating hum of absolute death. "I will give you 3 seconds to take that blade off her skin." "You're in no position to negotiate, Your Majesty," Pendleton sneered, stepping backward and dragging Harper with him toward the blown-out exit. "The Aegis Council sends their regards. I'm taking the golden blood." Harper's heart pounded furiously against her ribs. She looked at Donovan. She saw the desperation masking his rage. She wasn't just a homeless girl anymore. She was a survivor. The blood bond Donovan spoke of wasn't just a beacon. She could feel it. A strange, thrumming adrenaline coursed through her veins, a residual power left behind from his venom. She didn't freeze. She fought back. Harper drove her heavy combat boot backward, smashing her heel directly into Pendleton's shattered kneecap, a remnant injury from his military days that he heavily favored. Pendleton grunted in sudden agony, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. The knife slipped. That was all Donovan needed. The air actually cracked as Donovan broke the sound barrier. Before Pendleton could even comprehend the pain in his knee, Donovan was there. The Vampire King didn't use a weapon. He wrapped his massive hand entirely around Pendleton's face, his fingers digging into the mercenary's skull. With a brutal, merciless shove, Donovan slammed the commander backwards into the jagged, broken steel edge of the blown-out blast door frame. Pendleton went entirely limp, sliding down the metal frame to the floor, dead on impact. The remaining Strigoi, seeing their human commander obliterated in the blink of an eye, and the king standing completely unhinged in his fury, didn't hesitate. They turned and vanished into the smoke, abandoning the contract to save their own lives. Silence descended on the ruined bunker, save for the crackle of burning electrical wires and the heavy, ragged breathing of the 2 survivors. Donovan stood over Pendleton's body, his chest heaving, his hands soaked in blood. Slowly the terrifying crimson fire in his eyes faded back to a warm, deep amber. He turned to Harper, who was leaning against the wall, shaking violently as the adrenaline rapidly left her system. He crossed the room in 2 strides, falling to his knees in front of her. He gently pulled her hands away from her face, frantically inspecting her neck for any sign of a cut. Finding none, he let out a heavy, shuddering breath, pulling her flush against his broad chest. "You're safe," he whispered fiercely into her hair, his arms wrapping around her like a protective steel vault. "I've got you." Harper buried her face in his shoulder, gripping the fabric of his shirt. "They're going to keep coming, aren't they?" Donovan pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. The cold, ruthless king was gone, replaced by a man looking at the only light in his dark, eternal world. "They will," Donovan admitted, his thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. "I can make you disappear, Harper. I can give you the house in Ballard, a new identity, and enough money to ensure you never have to sleep in a freezing car again. I can sever the bond You can walk away right now, and you will never see me again." He paused, the muscle in his jaw ticking. "Or you can stay. You can stand by my side, and together we will hunt down every single member of the High Council who put a price on your head. But if you stay, you are mine, and I will burn the world to ash before I ever let anyone touch you again." Harper looked at the wreckage around them. She thought of her cold, lonely life, the crushing debt and the absolute powerlessness she had felt every single day. She looked into the amber eyes of the terrifying, beautiful monster who had just offered her the world. She didn't hesitate. Harper reached up her fingers, threading into his dark hair, and pulled his lips down to hers. "Burn it down," she whispered against his mouth. What an unbelievable twist of fate. From freezing and fighting for her life in a rusted Honda Civic, Harper Quinn unlocked a dark, secret world and claimed the heart of a billionaire vampire king. Will Harper and Donovan survive the wrath of the High Council, or will their enemies tear them apart? If you were on the edge of your seat for this thrilling, supernatural romance, hit that like button. Share this story with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more heart-pounding, true-life dramas.